Life is gay, life is sweet, interesting people on Christopher Street.
Such interesting people on Christopher Street.
Such interesting people live on Christopher Street.
Such interesting people on Christopher Street.
Hello, my name is Stan Isaacs. This is another in a series of interviews of interesting people at the Quadrangle. Today we talk with Rubby Sherr, eminent physicist, peerless Princetonian. Rubby, how did you get the name Rubby with two B's when anybody else would spell it with one B?
I really don't know, but my conjecture is that my parents were immigrants, and when a doctor objected that Rubby was a girl's name, he slipped an extra B. But ever since then, I've been mispronouncing my name.
So you're a double B.
Right.
All right, let's get back to the basics of your family, where they came from, and so forth. Where did your family come from?
I thought they came from Lithuania, but when I asked my mother, some 15 years ago, she said Courland. I couldn't convince her that it was Latvia or Lithuania, but much later I found a book of maps over the decades, and in 1900, on a map was a place called Courland. It was in Lithuania.
So your mother knew what she was talking about.
She always did.
Right. So when were you born?
I was born September 14, 1913.
So
almost 93 years ago.
So you're 92 plus.
I'm 92.8.
Okay. Worthy of a physicist to give us the correct decimal. You have siblings?
I had a brother and a sister, a twin brother, fraternal twin, and an older sister.
And you were born here?
I was
Your twins?
I was born in Long Branch, New Jersey. I lived in Lakewood.
Your sister was born?
My sister was born in Courland.
What's your mother and father's name?
Mother's name was Anna Jacobson. My father's name was Max.
And what kind of business was your father in?
We had a junkyard in Lakewood, New Jersey.
Who were your heroes growing up?
Frank Merriwell and some characters from Zane Grey, I guess. I was very young at that point.
Right. But not Teddy Roosevelt or Howard Taft or Woodrow Wilson?
No, at one point I remember being very much intrigued by Richard the Lionhearted.
Oh.
But recently I found that he expelled all the Jews from England, and so I thought less of him.
You dropped him. How about your schooling? Where did you go to high school?
Lakewood High School.
What class?
1930.
And where did you go to college?
New York University, Washington Square.
With what kind of a degree?
BS. And then in physics, and then went to Princeton for graduate work for a PhD, which I got in finally in 1938.
And in NYU you had gotten in 34, you told me?
Yeah.
What was your uncle? You told me a comment by your uncle about you getting a PhD. You were out of school. You worked at Harvard, you told me. And then you went to MIT, and there was some discovery there that you mentioned.
Yeah. Well, there were a couple, but the main thing was I figured out a way to use the radar in airplanes to determine the absolute ground velocity, which means its speed and direction, which was very important because up to that point, an airplane could only tell where it was and what speed it had relative to the air, which was always moving in some direction or other.
You said something about this was one of the most exciting nights of your life. Is that what you were talking about?
Oh, well, I proposed to friends at lunch at Radiation Lab that we use radar to help detect German troops who during the Battle of the Bulge could only move in supplies at night, and that we use radar Doppler effect to detect them. And we all laughed because a plane going 200 miles an hour, a truck moving 20 miles an hour, the discrepancy was too large. But that night I dreamt that I could do it, and went in the morning and found out that the set was already doing it, the radar sets, and that I hadn't do anything except describe what was happening. It's like, well, the reason that turned out was that, well, it was like the story of two geologists who were traveling in the mountains and came face to face with a lion. And one of them immediately dropped his backpack, and his friend said, "What are you going to do?" He said, "I'm going to run. The lion can run much faster than you, like my airplane." And the man said, "All I have to do is run faster than you." And so this was the reason my idea worked, is because I could see the ground, buildings, trees, and so on, at the same time as a moving vehicle. And so the relative velocity there would be only 20 miles.
Yeah. So you must have felt good about that.
Oh, yeah. I also felt bad because I had to go up in an airplane to prove it.
Oh.
And they frightened me. Airplanes were piloted by pilots who'd come home from the Pacific. They shot down 50 Zeros and weren't allowed to fly combat anymore.
Right.
And so on my first flight that morning, when I tried it to see whether I was right, when I said to the pilot, "Okay, we can go back home now," he did a split S, which means I shrunk from my present height to about 2 feet, and I looked out the window and it was vertical. And then I went boing, and I came back to myself again.
A good thing.
I didn't like those planes.
All right. After MIT, you went out to Los Alamos to work on the Manhattan Project.
That's right. Yeah.
How did you come to be connected with that?
Well, this was 1944. In 1940, when I was at Harvard, I became very close friends with a nuclear theorist. And he wrote me a letter in 1944 saying he needed me, could I come out to Los Alamos. It's the first time I ever heard of Los Alamos. But since he was a nuclear theorist, and that was my nuclear experimental work was my field, I thought, great, away from the airplanes. And so I went out to Los Alamos and found out that they were making bombs instead of hot water heaters.
How did you find out?
Oh, on the train to Los Alamos, on the Santa Fe Chief, I think it was a famous train that went from Chicago to Santa Fe. Louis Alvarez, later won the Nobel Prize, a very famous and clever physicist, I met him in the corridor, and he asked, "Do you know what we're doing?" I said, "No." So come into my bedroom. And so I went into his compartment, and then he told me that they were working on a bomb. My immediate reaction was, I'd rather fly in airplanes.
Well,
but I went on, of course.
We understand that what you achieved at Los Alamos is that you helped design the trigger for the atom bomb. Could you tell us about that work?
Well, there were two kinds of bombs. One was made of uranium, enriched uranium, in which two chunks were shot at each other. And once they joined, they represented a critical mass, which means they could explode. The plutonium bomb, on the other hand, was such that if you try to do it that way, it would blow apart on the way together, and so it would fizzle. And so Bob Christie, a young fellow from Caltech, had the idea of surrounding a sphere of plutonium, which by itself was not critical, but when compressed by explosives shell completely around it, would become critical. But at that instant, it needed, I think in a microsecond or so, a neutron to start the chain reaction. And my job of my group, was to develop something which was crushed and then emitted neutrons, and that's what we did.
Oh, good. All right, so then you were, I understand, in a bunker about 6 miles from the point where the bomb was detonated. Could you tell us what it was like and what was happening?
Well, it was below ground, but there was a part above ground with a slit window all around. And there were half a dozen of us who had instruments to detect various features of the explosion. I had mine, and I was looking at my oscilloscope, which is a television screen, and heard the count, 4, 3, 2, 1. And I yelled, "Who the hell turned on the light?" Because the illumination inside was fantastic. I immediately recognized it was a bomb, and I ran outside to see the cloud rising. And my first reaction was, what a great experiment, because dozens and dozens of people worked on different aspects of the bomb, how to make it work, and each had to perform what it was designed to do, and it did, including my gadget. So,
In retrospect, any thoughts about the bomb and the use of the bomb and what the significance of it? And
no. I was unhappy that it worked, was glad the atmosphere didn't ignite, but I had no further thoughts at that time.
And you went back to Princeton. And among other things, I understand you developed a cyclotron.
Built a cyclotron.
Built, yeah.
Had it built.
Yeah. What can you tell us about it?
Oh, it's a complex thing, and it was done by engineers who knew how to do these things.
So I'll show a picture. If Steve, our fearless cameraman, this is a picture of the cyclotron. This is who's the young man?
Graduate student.
Graduate student. And up here is a very youthful Rubby Sherr. Rubby spelled with 2 B's. Got that, Steve?
Actually, it's not the cyclotron, it's a control room for it. It's where all the electronic gear is that tells the cyclotron, which is a 80-ton magnet, tremendous vacuum systems, and so on.
Okay.
That are required.
Now, you told me about you had your students gave you a birthday celebrating your 90th birthday at Princeton.
That's right.
That was a gala affair.
That was a great affair, yeah.
And
that was 2 years ago.
Now, I saw a tape of that affair, and one of the highlights of the tape was you telling jokes. How about telling us one of those jokes that had them rolling in the aisles?
Oh, well, let's see, I told them about, high school, where the teacher had assigned to their literature course to bring in an essay the following Monday. And she knew a genuine author, and he came and gave a long, boring speech about how to write short stories. And he ended by saying that, well, if you have these 4 ingredients, it's sure to be a success. You have to have royalty, religion, mystery, and sex. If you have that, it's a sure hit. And he sat down. And a little girl far up in the class said, "I'm finished, I have it." And the author was a little irritated by this and said, "Well, read it." And so she got up and she read, "My God," said the Queen, "I'm pregnant, and I don't know who did it."
I should say that Ruby lights up the current events mornings every Tuesday with stories like these. So since you've been at Princeton, you've written more than 100 papers in physics, working, as I understand it, on low energy nuclear physics, radioactivity, and the interaction between nuclear particles. Did I get it right?
That's right, yeah.
Now, I looked up, you had a book which lists all the papers you've written, and I just picked out one, and the title, of course, everybody would find it easy to understand, because the title of it is Angular Correlation in the Inelastic Scattering of Protons by MG24. That's a snap. I don't know why anybody would even feel they had to read something like that.
No problem, no problem.
What are you working on now?
Well, I'm working on, I used to do experiments when I had a cyclotron. Now I've learned to do a certain type of calculation which is of interest in a process called nucleosynthesis. It reminds me, I'll tell you a little bit about nucleosynthesis.
Okay.
But the story is so complex that it reminds me of the time my wife told her grandmother that she had married a physicist, and her grandmother wanted to know what a physicist was. And so she said she didn't have much of an idea. But she said, well, if you want to know how far it is to the moon, a physicist can figure it out. And her grandmother thought about this, and she said, and you have to believe him? And so I'll tell you what I do. It's called nucleosynthesis, the theory being that we were born in supernova and in the stars. In ordinary stars, elements can be made starting with hydrogen, protons bumping into each other. Finally, you can get up to to iron 56. Beyond that, the repulsion against protons is so great that something else happens. And this happens in the supernova that explode, and having achieved its energy by the gravitational collapse of the star, that all the rest of the elements up to uranium are generated, sprayed into the universe, somehow or other finally get condensed and make us.
Good. I'm glad.
And you have to believe it.
You mentioned your wife. When were you married, and who was your wife?
My wife was Rita Ornitz, and we called her Pat.
What year?
And that was 1936, yeah.
And you had children?
We had 3 children. One of them was a little boy who died of SIDS at the age of 4 months.
SIDS is?
Sudden infant death.
Yeah.
And it's still not known why this occurs, but it does. The other 2 children are daughters. Elizabeth, who's a professor at Wayne State University,
Born,
born in 1941,
yeah.
and Frances Sherr, who lives in Wynwood, thank God, who's born in 1945.
And what does she do?
She's a in social worker and is an administrator in a project in Jenkintown. Yeah.
Now, you said that because your son was died at Los Alamos, that somehow you don't think much about, or you said that it's not something you associate positively with that experience
No,
at
no,
Los Alamos.
it was a tremendous tragedy, and it colored our feelings at the time and our memories of what went on.
This new book on Oppenheimer, which I know you have and I think is in the library here, mentions that your wife, Pat, mentions a number of occasions where she comforted Robert Oppenheimer's wife, Kitty. What can you tell us?
That's right, and in fact, she comforted Kitty so much. Kitty used to come to our house and drink our liquor because she was always addicted to alcohol at that time. And so she reports some of the stories about Kitty.
Well, there was something about you helping to take care of one of their children?
Oh, that's right, yes. In the spring of 46, I guess it was, Kitty brought her 4-month-old daughter over for Pat to take care of while she went off to visit her mother. And a beautiful child. Tony was her name. And then, of course, later returned to her parents, and we used to see them in Princeton from time to time.
Didn't Oppenheimer at one point ask if you'd like to adopt a child?
That's true, yeah. He thought that Pat was so fond of the child that she might be willing to adopt this child. And Pat, of course, objected, since the child had 2 good parents. Good in the sense of apparently good.
Your wife, when did she pass away?
We were due to come here in September 1947. We had a cottage assigned, but on August 6th, she went to a hospital for a minor operation and succumbed from staph infection. On August 26th, I lived alone for a few months and then decided to come to the Quadrangle, which we were very pleased with from our frequent visits in the 7 previous years. We'd visit Tevis on occasion.
And you were living in Princeton. You came here into the Quadrangle, you told me, in January 1998, correct? Yeah.
That's it, yeah.
And now you have a companion now?
Edith Leopold, yes. And I'm happy to say that she's recovering well from a series of health problems. Yeah.
Is she as good a bridge player as you are a physicist?
Yes.
So you've been at the Quadrangle since 1998. What do you think of life at the Quadrangle?
Well, it's a great place. I have only trivial problems with it. For example, the faucets either barely squirt or send out stream which bathe you. And the other thing is, I'm sick and tired of being ejected by bathroom doors, which have powerful springs in them. And I'm fine getting in, but when I leave, they tend to force me out with more speed than I like.
Well, I hope that management will be watching this, and they'll take
well,
care of it.
They finally fixed one fountain after 6 years of complaints.
I was in your apartment, and I should mention that there are some lovely quilts that were made by Pat Sherr, and very impressive. I'm particularly appreciative of quilts because my wife Bobby is an excellent quilter.
I've seen it, yes.
Now, you wouldn't tell me this, but other people said to me, well, ask him about his folk singing. He knows folk songs, and he sings at any old time. You never know. Tell me about that, and particularly how you learned all the folk songs that you know.
Well,
I understand cowboy songs, folk songs, all kinds of songs.
all kinds of songs, including a few Yiddish songs. But my first acquaintance was with a fellow senior at NYU who decided to be a collector of folk songs. And I went with him on a couple of occasions to collect songs. I remember once we went to Camp Dix, where there was a fellow named Dixie. We went and met him. He was quite old, I would guess 60s, 70s. He looked like Robert E. Lee with a white beard and mustache. And so we asked him to sing. My friend had a magnetic tape recorder. And so Dixie said, "There was a man lived near Bridgewater. He had 3 sons and 1 daughter dear." And then he stopped. And he couldn't remember. So we had to buy him a beer. He also had a bound boy Johnny, so neat and trim in every limb. Stop. Another beer. And so finally we got the whole song. We were broke, but were able to get back to New York City. And
All right, but you're being modest now. You had some dealings with Alan Lomax, who is one of the great names in folk song collection
oh yes,
archives.
this was many years later in Princeton. He was visiting friends in Roosevelt, New Jersey, which was an artist community, writers, artists, and Alan Lomax visited, and at a party, he and I started singing songs. I remember he sang a John Henry song, and I sang a version that I knew, and then he sang some other song, and we kept nose to nose singing songs all night, too. It was a glorious night.
No, it sounds like.
Glorious night.
Now, you've had a couple of folk song parties here, and I bet you the people there liked it, but you say they didn't work out. What happened?
Well, folk songs tell stories. And you don't get a bunch of people together and they all tell the same story. But in songs, they can all sing it. And I didn't enjoy that. So I ceased trying to. What I thought would happen is someone would sing a song and then I would be reminded of a song, and then he would be reminded, and you would be reminded, and so on, and it would be a song fest and that kind. But I don't blame people for liking sing-alongs, but it wasn't my purpose.
We used to call those kinds of things in New York hootenannies.
Hootenannies, I see, yeah.
All right. Where do you do your singing now? The car, shower?
Any place. As a matter of fact, a couple of days, songs suddenly come to mind, a fragment. But we'll have no care if the weather prove fair. And I wonder, what's the rest of it? And finally I worked it out. It's the angler song. Man's life is but feigned for such trouble and pain, and there was as short as a bubble. 'Tis a hodgepodge of business and money and care and money and trouble. But we'll have no care if the weather prove fair, nor will we be vexed for though it rain. We will banish all sorrow and fish till tomorrow and angle all day.
Good, very good. One of the things people told me about you, you're knowledgeable about birds, And when I said you're a bird man, you said you're not a bird man, you're a duck man. So please explain.
Well, birds flitter from one branch to another. And as I aged, I found it was difficult to draw my binoculars and focus on them before they flitted away. Ducks, on the other hand, sit on the water. And so I prefer looking for ducks, especially there are ponds in New Jersey along the Atlantic shore, in Delaware near Dover, where there are ponds that a car can, also I'm lame, so I've given up hiking, ponds that you can drive around and look for birds.
Well, you say that you're a duck man, but at your apartment there are pictures all over of birds. And as a matter of fact, while I was there, there was a yellow bird on the feeder. What was that bird?
That was a goldfinch, yeah.
And there was something distinctive about it?
Very pretty.
Yeah.
And it eats upside down. House finch can't. They'll come to the feeder and they get onto the roost and realize they have to go upside down, and then they fall off. They can't do it. So it saves me lots of thistle.
One of the other things I noticed in your apartment is a loose leaf full of a lot of jokes. I think most of them sent by Tevis, if I know my internet man. Tell us another one of those jokes.
Another one. Oh, yeah. In fact, I was reminded of one when a friend in Sarasota phoned me. We had a long conversation, and I said, before I hang up, I'd like to tell you a joke. So I started telling, I told you that. And it was. It was a joke about a couple who moved to Miami, retired there, and were smart enough to realize they needed a physician. They got the name of a likely doctor, made an appointment, and went to his office. The woman went in first, and the physician said, quite properly, before I examine you, I should know whether you have intercourse. And she said, intercourse? I don't know, I'll have to ask Sam. So she went into the office and said, Sam, do we have intercourse? And he said, I told you 1,000 times, Blue Cross and Blue Shield.
You mentioned at one point that you're lame. Now, everybody who knows you sees you getting around on a scooter. How did you become infirm?
One year, about 20 years ago, I got shingles, as most of us do. My shingles was in my shin. Maybe that's why they call it shingles. But at any rate, on the process of the virus going from my spine to my shin, it paralyzed my left quad, and so I've been lame ever since. And I'm getting old, so I'm getting weak. So I ride more and more.
Well, now I'd like to end this. No, but before I do, something else. You've lived a rich and long life. Any thoughts about your life at this point?
Well, I must confess, enough is enough. It's been an interesting life, and high points, low points, but I'm glad it happened. But as Woody Allen said, he doesn't want to be around when it ends.
Okay, one last thing. I want to talk about the meeting of two great men. Did your paths ever cross at Princeton with Albert Einstein?
Well, when I came to do graduate work at Princeton in 1934, the Institute for Advanced Study had personnel, but it didn't have a building, and so they were in the mathematics building, which adjoined the physics building. It turned out that the library traditionally was in the math building, and so when physicists wanted to use the library, they had to go into the math building in a corridor between the two buildings. And when the people in the math building wanted to go home, the easiest way to get to the main street was to go to the physics building. So there was a constant flux of physicists going into the math building and mathematicians going the other way. And when I'd been at Princeton maybe a month or two.
This was in what year?
In 1934.
Yes.
Yeah, 34. I was going to the library in Fine Hall, the math building. The corridor had two swinging doors to keep down the drafts, and each door had a square window, about a 1 foot square. And as I approached the swinging doors, I saw a face in the opposite door. It was Albert Einstein. And of course, I was overwhelmed with wonder and awe. And as we simultaneously went through the doors, I stumbled and stepped on his foot. And he, being a Russian gentleman of culture, stepped back and said, "Excuse me." I don't remember what I did, but that was my only encounter with Einstein. I used to see him at lectures and so on. But
In relation to that, Rubby has memorialized that by putting up a huge poster outside his apartment at 7318, if anybody wants to go down and take a look at it. And he put a note in the corner which says, "Takeoff on Washington slept here." It says, "Rubby Sherr stepped here." So I'm going to bring it over to the camera and have the viewers get a quick look at it. But you'll get a better look outside 7318, so bear with me for a second. I will get over and Steve will put the camera on the picture of Einstein and the note that Rubby Sherr stepped here circa 1934. Okay, thank you, Steve. I think somebody said that Einstein said later that night, "That young man is going to go far." So, thank you now, and we appreciate your coming here, Rubby, and we'll look forward to an interview in 2 months. I hope you enjoyed speaking with us.
I'd like to say that I wore this vest, which is full of flies, and hoping that some older fishermen, members of Trout Unlimited, will see the vest anyway.
Good. That your last word?
My last word.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
The best people live on Christopher Street.